There's Adam coming.
They're not
Strongly.
Yeah, he's on his way. We've got an appointment at the Girdwood folks. I think are coming up. Do you want us to mix it up?
It seems very intimidating. This is how we normally do it.
I'm gonna go with
We can mix and mingle. I'll toss it to her.
Press it. Okay. Okay. Sides here. All right, we're gonna.
Okay. Here, I'll take on this here.
I'm quiet.
You're good. You can bang and gavel from there.
Sounds hollow.
You're ready?
Hey, go ahead.
I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly. The third work session regarding Holtan Hills AO 2022-103 competitive disposal of HLD parcels to CY Investments. It is Friday, January 6, 2023. We are scheduled from 5 to 7 p.m. today. We are starting a few minutes late, 5:10 p.m. I just want to confirm that we are recording.
You are.
Okay, we are recording and projecting. We'll go ahead around the room for assembly member and other elected official introductions, and let's start with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson,
Felix Rivera. Christopher Constant.
Randy Soul,
Thanks, Alato.
Billy Sweet, Daniel Hall.
Suzanne LaFrance. On the phone, and then we'll go around the rest of the table here. We have Mr. Perez Verdia. Are you there?
He emailed that he's on.
Okay, I heard he's on as
I
well.
can see him. You might just have to come off mute.
Okay, and Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Cross?
Present and accounted for, thank you.
Great, thank you. And also around the table?
Mike Edgerton, GBOS.
Emma Kramer, Girdwood resident.
Jennifer Wingard, GBLS.
Claire Ross, assembly staff.
And also,
Kyle Kelly, Gerwood Service Area Manager.
and Adam Trombley is en route and should be here soon. And I'm not sure if there are other members of the administration who are coming, but again, should be here soon. Thanks to everyone for convening on a Friday evening. It's always lovely to be in Girdwood, especially on such a beautiful evening, lovely drive. The purpose of this work session, and I want to note that documents are available at online, muni.org/worksessions. And also, I believe, Claire, we have it posted. Do we have it posted at another location at the website, the documents under hot topics?
I do think we have a section on hot topics for this under our housing section of hot topics, but the best place to go for documents would be.
Thanks. And then there are documents available here in the room. We've got the S version, S for substitute version of the ordinance, S1 being submitted or has been submitted by member Zelatil, along with a floor amendment from member Zelatil, the S1, and then an assembly memorandum. And so the purpose of today's work session is to review the S1 version and have a discussion, address concerns. Before we get into that, I am going to hand the gavel over to the vice chair, Mr. Constant. This is a area or an item of significant concern to constituents in District 6, and I'm one of the representatives of District 6. And so I want to participate and listen and ask questions. So thank you, Vice Chair Constant, for serving as chair.
Right, so I don't have an agenda in front of me, and so how should we proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll start with Ms. Zalatel, and hopefully Mr. Trombley will be here soon. And I don't know if you want to just go ahead and walk through right now, or if you want to.
Yep, I think that makes great sense. So I have a PowerPoint that walks through some of the changes in a bit more of like a bite-sized manner. But first, I want to thank everyone for attending the work session and showing up at public hearings, sharing your concerns and opinions in the local media, emails, and comments. I sincerely appreciate it because your continued participation and information sharing has helped me better understand issues. And I'm hoping this can be a collaborative process to develop something that we can move forward with. I think it's important as we get started here that we acknowledge that Girdwood faces major year-round residential housing shortage. You'll see that reflected in some of the language. And I see that as the main problem we're here to address, though it might be through different ideas and different mechanisms. And so if we walk through this PowerPoint, go to the next slide. Really, the goals that I had for the S1 were to acknowledge the housing challenges in Girdwood, clarify what constitutes value to the Heritage Land Bank, clear parameters on single family lots within the conveyance, clear parameters on the conveyance of a lot to the Girdwood community, and then how to figure out ongoing collaboration between Heritage Land Bank and GBOS in a meaningful way. So starting with pretty much what I've done here is I haven't summarized the S1 changes as to the whereas clauses, but as to the pertains section, the operational section of the ordinance, because I think that is where the meat is. We can talk about the whereas clauses and the policy statements and how those will drive and inform the process, but I really wanted to talk about the pieces that are operational if this were to pass. First, there's a single family home restriction for no short-term rentals, except if an ADU is built, then the ADU may be used as a short-term rental. This starts out initially as a deed restriction on the parcels and will ride with the property and can only be replaced when the homeowners association files the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and cannot be changed even once filed through the HOA unless there's 100% unanimous approval by all eligible members of the HOA. Meaning the short-term rental restriction for single-family homes stays in place unless 100% agree to change it. The next change was that in the S, it says a multifamily lot could be given to Girdwood for development out of the HLB profits. This says at least one multifamily lot for at least 8 units be conveyed to Girdwood. We don't know how successful this project will or won't be. And so if the profits are enormous, I wanted to leave open the possibility for there to be additional conveyance and not restrict it. So it sets the floor, not the ceiling of what could be conveyed by HLB. Continued engagement is required between CY Investments and HLB with Girdwood, and then collaborative funding effort, which was put in at the request of the Girdwood community and working with Ms. LaFrance to provide for the secondary access to Crow Creek Road. So if we go to the next slide, I'm actually going to pass over this slide till Mr. Trombley gets here. These were questions I received via email and the answers I received from Mr. Trombley, and I would like to review them together when he gets here. So that is a very high level overview. And then there's a substantial floor amendment to clean up some language. But I want to just kind of talk a bit more broadly in that the real intention here is to work in an iterative process together. I don't suspect that the S1 version, as it is now, will be the final version. I suspect there will continue to be some floor amendments. This is a big purpose of this work session, is to get feedback about it. It is that feedback that drove the S1. And that I will encourage you as we have the opportunity to talk tonight to provide specific feedback about the S1. So the editorial changes, these were done collaboratively with the Heritage Land Bank. First and foremost, it clarifies that the total number of acres being disposed is 60.4. I received a number of emails unclear about the total number of acres to be disposed. My spelling was wrong, so there's a big change there, whoops. And then the next one is that the entitlement process that will be used for purposes of the conveyance of a lot to the Girdwood community. Originally in the S, it said within 5 years of the passage of the ordinance, Girdwood could accept a lot if it had a legal entity to do so. And I said, well, we won't know the lot. We won't know what the plat looks like. There's still pieces to go through. And the big piece is the planned unit development. So we don't even have a way to evaluate which of the 3 lots that are slated for multifamily will be available or could be available. So this starts the clock running upon approval of the conditional use permit for the residential planned unit development. So the clock wouldn't start until you know what you're actually dealing with for potential conveyance. It updates that AWU did receive the federal grant for the sewer infrastructure that was recently confirmed by Senator Murkowski's office. And then that the conditional use permit will require that the planned unit development exceed the allowable density currently allowed for that land. It seems a little far-fetched, but I wanted to avoid the possibility that the planned unit development would only give us what you could do today without it. So it says, no, you have to exceed the density of what you could do today without the planned unit development. And then the second to last bullet there is about a liaison to work between HLB and GBOS. I acknowledge there's been a lot of turnover at HLB. The point here is to provide you with a consistent point of contact that can liaison between the 2 entities and to do so, I believe, for 6 months after someone's been appointed and in that position for a half year. However, I wouldn't be surprised if that's working well, that would just continue until the project is done, and that would be something I could support. And then, as I mentioned about the secondary access at Crow Creek Road, that was put in per the request of some feedback I received from Ms. LaFrance. So that's the S1 changes and the amendment as currently drafted. And I am unaware if other members currently have amendments. This was just mine. So with that, that's the S1.
Thank you. It's Alto.
And Mr. Chair, when we get, can we go back to the questions for HLB when Mr. Trombley gets here? Okay.
Good, it's fine.
You specify the parties will split the cost of the third party.
You're gonna have to speak way up without mic.
Which 2, hold on, Daniel, just know everybody up here, you're speaking not just for us, but everyone in the back. So do your best to project.
Which 2 parties are splitting the cost of the third party liaison?
So that would be HLB and Girdwood. And Girdwood GBOS may not be able to, but it would be able to be worked through Girdwood Inc. Yes.
Okay, so before we proceed further into questions, why don't we go back to the slide and give Mr. Charlie just a minute to get settled. And we have the question about HLB or the slide about HLB. So Ms. Alto.
Yeah, thank you. So the questions for HLB came out of some emails. And as I said, these were responses received by Mr. Trombley. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize them. And I actually, if I may, Mr. Chair, I have actually a couple of questions to kind of follow up on the answers. And I thought that that would be a great way to kick off the discussion on these topics. Okay, great. So the first question is, what exactly are the mechanics of a designate for future disposal? So this would be that lot that would be disposed for Girdwood. And it says, CY will develop all lots. The multifamily lot for future disposal will be chosen and reserved from the sale. All other lots will be sold. Net profits will be calculated. HLB will receive half the profits, which will include the chosen multifamily lot. The next one says, is this just a mandate to amend the HLB work plan? No, there's no need to amend the HLB work plan. These lots were already slated for sales/development. Will it be reflected in a plat note for phase 1 subdivision plat? No, at the time of platting, CY will be the only owner. Plat notes do not reflect, cannot direct future disposals of the property. 4, will the MOA retain title to the lot designated for future disposal? No, all parcels will be conveyed to CY for development. So the follow-up question I have to that, Mr. Trombley, is how do we ensure that if HLB has profits and wants to convey a lot to Girdwood for future development, that the lot will be made available if all lots are owned by CY after the conveyance?
Well, it's done through the ordinance. So the ordinance identifies that a lot will be given to them. Now, the lots don't exist because the plat hasn't been approved. But because we have to follow the law in the ordinance,
So
that we provide a multifamily lot, which is written in there, correct?
yes.
Okay.
So the ordinance will be controlling, even though there's not a note on the plat or anything else that rides on the actual property.
Yes, ma'am.
Number 5, how is the lot to which this obligation applies selected? Does the MOA get to pick, or must there be, oh, that's my typo, I'm sorry, the agreement between CY and MOA on which the platted multifamily lot is subject to this requirement? The answer is CY and HLB will work together to choose the lot. Mr. Trombley, is there any objection or way that we could ensure that GBOS would have the opportunity to weigh in on which lot could be chosen? If there are 3 multifamily lots in the mix, when that decision point comes, is there some way to involve Girdwood in the process of choosing? Or getting the recommendation at a minimum?
Well, the only way the process I would see that would take place, I believe, would be that there's a requirement in the ordinance that there's going to be basically a third party liaison to have constant communication between HLD and, I can't remember, we said the Girdwood community, but I think we specified GBOS. And that there would be that communication. So I believe that would be the process in which that would take place.
And then number 6, must the development already have generated a profit before HLB obtains title to the multifamily lot for future disposal to a housing entity, or is the value of the multifamily lot just counted against the HLB share of future profits? The answer is yes, the development must generate a profit in order to meet the condition of the lot to be drawn from HLB's portion of profits. The development agreement calls for compensation to HLB to come after the sale of all lots in phase 1. So the sharing of profits will come for the sale of all phase 1 lots, except for the set aside multifamily lot. My follow-up question is that all lots are originally conveyed to CY Investments, and HLB is ready to convey the lot to Girdwood, but there could be a time lag because the 5 years may not be up. Will HLB retake ownership of the lot for conveyance once it's identified? How will it be held until Girdwood might be ready?
Can you wait 1 second?
Sure, and we can follow up on it later if you need a.
Well, I believe Ben Bowman's on the line. He could probably explain that process. He was at the municipal attorney's office. Ben?
Yes, Adam. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, the lots set aside, it'll be title with the disposal will be transferred to CY Investments. This lot, the intention, and as it's stated in the ordinance, will be set aside for, to be held for Girdwood, whichever entity is created to take title. And then CY would be holding that lot until such time as Girdwood has an entity that is ready to take title. It does not have to be transferred back to HLB. CY is able to hold that lot back. They are aware of what's going on with this disposal ordinance. Does that fully answer the question?
I believe so, Mr. Bowman. You're saying then that you believe that it will be held with CY unless there's some other arrangement made, and that they will hold the lot until such time as either the time lapses or Girdwood has the entity identified.
Through the chair, yes, that they would be held much like all the other lots to be sold by CY to whomever buys them, this lot to be transferred to Girdwood upon Girdwood developing the requisite entity, or as you mentioned, the time elapsing.
I have a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bowman.
So, Mr. Bowman, Mr. Bird Constant here. So that one lot, would it be recorded on the title that that lot is in reserve for the community?
On the title transferred to CY at this time, or on the title that would eventually transfer to the Girdwood entity? I apologize.
Decision is made, if it isn't made in the affirmative, then there's a piece of land that will be identified to transfer to the community for its housing interests. At that time, will some recording be made on the title so everybody knows that lot is the lot that's identified for transfer?
There's, Adam, do you want to jump in?
No,
Or I have an answer, but I don't want to step on your toes.
No, you're not.
I think that's the only way, right? Isn't that the only way that insurance is granted, other than if it's by ordinance? That's one thing, but
Well, it is by ordinance, it is a condition upon the disposal. Therefore, it's, transfer to that lot to Girdwood would be required to occur by this ordinance that is being contemplated tonight.
right, but what everyone is concerned about is that ordinance can be amended on any given Tuesday. And so that's, I think, the question that I'm trying to understand is, what's the mechanism to ensure that that lot, once identified, it is transferred?
May I, Mr. Chair? So in that paragraph,
Right now, the ordinance is the
You're flipping out.
I would recommend, this is Meg Zalatel, it says at the end of that paragraph about the transfer of the multifamily lot that if the Girdwood entity is not established, the multifamily lot reverts to the Heritage Land Bank ownership. I think it may be worth an amendment to say that when the lot is identified in the HLB profits, that it then transfers to HLB with the restriction placed on it for purposes of the conveyance within the time remaining. I think that might not be the most elegant way, but it is a way. Okay, well, this is to have a conversation around potential amendments. So
I would do it, I have to just say it's reported onto that. That property is identified for transfer from the organization. That seems to be the simplest, straightest way, because that no transfer will be allowed except for to that entity identified by the parties.
the property won't be identified until such time as the planned unit development and entitlements are done.
No, absolutely, but before that, you're not gonna transfer that land to someone else, say, to the HOB or anything. Mr. Drummond.
Yes, right, so in the hypothetical, let's assume that, there's basically a 5-year revisionary clause. If there is no entity created and you've already sort of written this in there, how do you remove that?
You put it as a conditional recording on the title that states up until this time and date, the conditions exist. If the conditions are not met, then this condition is no longer valid.
I'll tell you what, I'm not necessarily opposed to, it, I just don't know the mechanism, so what I'll do is, I'll talk to, I'll follow up with legal on. On that.
Seems to be that provides good confidence to people because that recording documents to a higher authority, which is the state recorder's office.
And that concluded the questions I've written out for HLB. I do have one additional one because I believe I made an error in the S1. I have in the whereas clauses that this property is estimated to have a market value of $2,100,000. That's based on the appraisal. Is that accurate? Did I get the appraisal amount right?
Yes, ma'am, you did.
Okay. And then I think then the error I might have made is in the projected profits for the deal. Let me find the reference. Yeah, on page 4, line 4, that whereas that the profits are estimated to be $1.2 million. Is that an accurate figure?
Predicated based on the last pro forma, I would say that that's accurate. Since the last pro forma, market conditions are constantly in flux, so I can't promise you that that is the current amount today.
Okay. And actually,
Now for phase 1 and 2.
Yes, that's correct.
and actually that error was pointed out by Mr. Edgington, so maybe he could talk with us a little bit about that. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Please, again, speak loudly, folks.
Sure, so I think the only pro forma I've seen publicly was from April this last year, and that stated a net profitability before taxes of 4.5 million. So half of that being greater than 1.2, be about 2.25 million. So I just wondered if is there another pro forma that hasn't been made public since August, or is it just a math calculation?
There's been no other.
Right, so it should, so I'm right, the profitability should be half of the net revenue before taxes. That the number that should be in that.
I'm gonna go back and look at the pro forma. But I'll get you the number.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's, Mr. Chair, that's all I have for the presentation and the conversation. I would ask to be able to make some closing remarks as we go to the end.
Of course. And the other vehicle other than property agreement, but that's before we get to the part where we have land about like various lots. So other people. Anyone else? Can't be here for just that. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm hoping to, I know we want to hear from Mr. Edgington. And if we could do that next.
Sure, Mr. Edgington, you have the floor.
Okay. First of all, there's 3 of us here from the community that would like to speak. Myself and part of GBOS, Jennifer Wingard, who's also a GBOS supervisor, and Emma Kramer, who was one of the co-chair of our housing advisory committee, who helped kind of coalesce the community tasks and propose some potential changes to the development agreement. So I think the 3 of us are going to talk. It won't just be me. So we had a meeting earlier on this week where we as a community sort of looked at the S1, and I think there are still kind of 6 major issues, not just S1, but overall on this project, which are still exercised in the community. And I'll just summarize them very briefly. The first one is that the financials for this whole deal are pretty opaque. We've seen that one pro forma, a single page, and that's been it. When you look at the cost of our land, which is available for sale within Girdwood Valley. In fact, if you look at land which is for sale at the very upper end of the gap, valley in Upper Crow Creek, where there are no services, that's selling at around 100,000 an acre. And the figure for Hillsborough developed land is it's evaluated at $23,000 per acre. So it's immediately this very mismatch, and it's unclear why. So these kind of questions, we would like to understand where they're coming from. Again, in the financials, there's no cash flow projection of profit and loss projection for phase 3, which is still part of this project. And a comment which I don't completely understand, but somebody who does understand this made a comment. And it's unclear how the debt that's incurred in this project is actually going to be repaid. It doesn't appear in the profit and loss. There are costs associated with financing, but not the capital itself. So these kind of very fundamental questions about where, does the municipality end up with a bucket of debt at the end of its whole lot? These kind of questions, I don't think there's a lot of information available. So I think you as a body should obviously consider those, and we are also exercised. The second issue is, for a variety of reasons over the last few years, there really is not a high degree of trust between the community and HLB. It may be reciprocated, but I can say as a community member, there have been a lot of things in the last few years that make us somewhat distrustful of HLB as an entity. I think the lack of really meaningful engagement throughout this process kind of underlines that to some extent. GBOS sent a resolution asking for consideration of attainable housing a year and a half ago, way before the development agreement was produced, and we never received any acknowledgement. Definitely nothing happened. Nothing was included in the development agreement to that effect. So it feels very much that we've been ignored. The whole process since we eventually saw the development agreement in May this year, there's really been no real movement, no real interest in HLB making any changes, really not considering them, until a couple of days before the December work session. I think that was the only time we saw any movement. And there have been various other things stated publicly as well by other ex-real estate directors, which I can't blame anyone here for. They're the first two things. The third thing is it's more of a technical issue, but I know the HLB Advisory Commission did pass a resolution which approved of the sale subject to specific conditions. The original ordinance did not include those conditions. The S version included 3 out of 5 conditions, and the S1 version contains, I think, 2 complete conditions, parts of 2 others. So none of these ordinances in front of the Assembly, as they stand now, contain that same set of conditions. So although the ordinance states in the whereases that the HLB Advisory Commission approved this sale, it actually did subject to conditions which are not included in any documentation. So technically, they haven't actually approved. The fourth issue, and I might come back to this a little bit later, is the whole issue of secondary access from Crow Creek Road. My understanding is that in a normal private development, road access sort of along the edges of the development would be paid for by the developer themselves. And what I'm seeing in a lot of the documentation around here is an assumption that the municipality is going to pay for it, either the municipality directly or via other grants. And I really would appreciate some explanation of why we're in that space and why that's the framework of discussion here, which is unlike other typical private developments. There's also some concern about the secondary access through Crow Creek Road requiring phase 2 to go ahead, and there being no guarantee that phase 2 will go ahead. Next quick point is, I think in general, most of the feedback from the community is, well, the S1 version is pretty supportive of Girdwood's needs for housing. And it's probably the first document we've seen that's actually responded to our concerns. There's a lot of language in there which is sort of directional, and very little language in there which is mandatory. In an earlier part of the Holtan Hills Housing Advisory Commission, there were a set of requests, I think 5 or 6 requests, and some of those have been addressed within the ordinance part. I think as I referred to it as the meat of the S1, and others have not been. So there's supportive language, whereas is in there, but there's nothing which is actually mandated or required. And again, partly because of the I would say, somewhat less than the trustworthy relationship we have with HLB. I think that is a concern to the community. And my last main point is, I titled it Plans or Lack Thereof. The whole process of the apparent change of status of the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan from being something expired to something that, got resurrected. Maybe it was always there, it just wasn't clear. And we definitely have received in the past indications that it was not there. A lot of the documentation, I think the original proposal from Connie's group also acknowledged that the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan was not enforced. The change in status of the plans there, the lack of any area master plan, which is mandated in code, the fact that we're seeing parts of some elements of the Crow Creek Neighborhood Land Use Plan are being used as justification for this project, such as the number of housing which was projected in 2006, yet other things in there which require private development to include components of affordable housing are not being considered, they're being ignored. So there's an inconsistency in the way that plans are kind of being brought forward and dropped and also looked at as a whole. And I think the last thing is I would say there's a concern, maybe it's conspiratorial thinking, but it's hard to not see this as a factor. But the global community has been criticized for not solving various problems in the past. One of the ways we're trying to solve this is by updating our area plan, our Goodwood area plan. And that at the moment looks like we will have that going through the adoption process later this year. There does appear to be a rush to get this particular project started and going through it, so it effectively precedes that area plan. So any changes we as a community want and have been asking for a number of years, which would be encoded through the adoption of that plan, effectively this is kind of an end run, so the project starts before that point. I have some specific comments about the S1, but I'm going to hold them till later.
Is it okay for me?
Please.
Okay. All right. So my name's Jennifer Wingard, and on GBOS, and have been following this very closely. I'm also a long-term landlord, and I have been a landlord in Goodwood for over 20 years, and also in Anchorage. So I've had kind of a first row fish-eye view of the differences that have developed in the market, and that's been one of the things that has drawn me to paying attention to this. I'd like to build on a couple of the things that Mike was talking about. To the financial opaque comments, we have a number of outstanding questions that some of which have been submitted formally by FOIAs, say September, and still not answered. We have a number of outstanding FOIAs, months old, that have not been answered. And so I want to be clear that we're not talking about our feelings that things are opaque. We are talking about the fact that they are opaque. We're talking about not being able to get answers to questions like what has been paid or promised to the developer already prior to assembly approval should be an easy question. And that's one of the FOIAs that has not been answered, and it's just months old now. And I think that question is every bit as relevant now as it would have been for, say, the Housing Transit Center. One of our other questions is about the Capital Projects Fund, which we see has in 2021, $2.9 million transferred into it. And we can't find any public accounting of that. We can't find any balance sheet for that. And we want to know, where is that? And I've put in requests to the finance department. We've put in requests to HLB, and we don't know where those millions of dollars are sitting, who's managing them, what's being paid out of that account, or who's overseeing this whole thing. So again, those aren't about feelings. Those are things that should not have been this hard to get, and we shouldn't even be here this late down the road without having some of that information. I'd like to also clarify about the HLBAC vote, including conditions. There's something very interesting about that vote. They didn't just include conditions. They specifically said that without those conditions, this doesn't meet the public benefit. So right now we are all sitting around talking about something that the HLBAC did not pass and specifically already said doesn't meet public benefit. We kind of feel like, I don't mind using the word feeling, what is being shown, what we're setting up a precedence for is telling the HLBAC that their votes don't matter. Speaking of things that don't matter, the HLBAC is also asked for not only finally getting back around to the 5-year plan review, but also an annual review or even just a budget review. That was not done in the last year. No budget review for HLB was done. And you're about to hand this agency a multi-million-dollar project. And they're not actually handling their own finances in a way that is consistent with public transparency that is legally required.
Hold on just a minute.
Yeah.
There's people that wish to speak. Mr. Trombley.
I've seen multiple emails in regards to the HLB commission. The HLBAC did approve the land transfer. I think it's important for folks to understand that it's the Heritage Land Bank Advisory Commission, which means it's advisory only. They could come back and say, we don't approve, and the assembly could say, thank you for your opinion. We're going to approve the transfer anyways. In retrospect, and conversely to that, they could come back and say, we absolutely approve of this, and the assembly could say, no. So the conditions that the HLBAC placed upon this is advisory only. Their vote is advisory only. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, it's just a statement of fact. We have many boards and commissions that are advisory in nature, and the assembly can listen to them, or they can modify what they say. It happens all the time. So I just wanted to address
I
that.
will respectfully say that this administration or this assembly has learned a lot. Sometimes they ask them something, we say no.
It happens all the time.
This is the norm for us.
Thanks. Your first point, I didn't catch it because you ran through them really fast. What has been paid or something? Can you restate it? And then I have a question about it.
We have a FOIA request about.
I'm hearing your really.
Okay. We have been asking repeatedly to know what has been paid to the way the development agreement is written. There are monies that get paid to this developer before some of the work actually done, before the breaking ground. And we want to know what money has been paid already and what money is owed already. So that it being equally relevant, right? Whether or not the money has been paid, is it already owed? Okay, and so anyway, seems like a simple question.
Great. Can Mr. Trombley answer that question?
The last thing that I heard, I believe that HLB is paid CY Investments. Don't quote me, but the last I heard several months ago was, I think it was $100 and something. But that doesn't mean it hasn't changed since then. So.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Is it typical for HLB to pay funds to a potential developer or someone who may be seeking to receive HLB lands in the course of the transaction prior to the conveyance?
Everything's lined out in the development agreement, which was based on the RFP. And so in regards to the development agreement, yes. And as the development agreement is written, yes.
Thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up question? Does that also address the amount of money that's owed? I didn't hear an answer to that question.
I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but I've gotten 5 of them.
Okay. Well, that is one of the questions we've been trying to get. And then circling back,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, please. How much is owed is not necessarily going to be a straight answer, because a lot of it depends on whether or not the land is conveyed and transferred and what we will or won't owe. So as all of you have seen the development agreement and have, I'm assuming, completely have read it and understand it, you'll notice in there that there's certain requirements that have to be met. If those aren't met, there's certain responsibilities and payments are supposed to happen. So I can't give you an exact figure because I don't know what the assembly is ultimately going to do. And you'll see that as I assume all of you completely understand the development agreement.
So if I might, I would say that the way you get to the question of what may be owed is the question of what has been spent by them. That's not our information at this time. Right, so under the agreement, I gather, I haven't read the fine detail, but when you're asking the question of what do we owe them? Probably nothing until such a time as the agreement falls apart, if it does, and then there are some qualified expenses that would be approved. So it's impossible to say really without the question of what's been spent. And that is their information, not ours. And I don't have that in specific, that's just general principle on these kinds of issues. Please continue.
Sure. I think there's more to that, but I'm gonna leave it. I think the way it is written, there is the possibility of things being owed now, whether or not it falls apart. But again, let's leave it for now. I'm hoping that that question can be answered to whatever degree it can be answered, even if there are other possibilities hanging out there. I do hope that we can get that question answered. And I also want to say, I certainly agree that the HLBAC vote is advisory only. They're clear on that too. However, they are also clear in the fact that they did not approve this land transfer. So it's very clear. It's in the minutes of the meeting. Again, I don't want to be argumentative, but it is very clear, and they made a point of making that clear. So it is inaccurate to say that this has passed.
So I have a question from Mr. Salt.
So, something I asked along last year, we started an effort to include those stipulations by the advisory committee. Where does GBOS stand on those stipulations? So if an S version came forward with those stipulations listed in it, are we thumbs up? Are we thumbs down? Are we not there yet?
Can I take that? In our last resolution, we explicitly said that we did not consider the HLB Advisory Commission conditions to be adequate, or to be, so we have said no to that set of conditions. Just for specifics, it's actually page 4, the last whereas about line 22, where it says strict that the HLB passed the resolution recommending the disposal of portions, etc. It does not say anything about conditions. It just says HLBAC recommended it. That is not factually correct. So.
Okay, Mr. Trump.
Yeah, we can see my investment is $5,000.
So, Ms. Allen.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the Heritage Land Bank Advisory Commission resolution, and I see the 5 conditions, and I think it's easy to make an amendment to say the resolution with the conditions. So as I'm reading through it, I think condition number 1 is expressed in the S1. I think condition number 4, while not explicitly expressed in the S1, does that with the set aside lot for Girdwood. It says 25% to be developed for multifamily units and set aside for rental development. It would be up to the community of Girdwood what it wanted to do, but one out of 3 multifamily lots, that would be 1/3 possibility. And then continues to engage with Girdwood Holtan Hills Housing Advisory Committee. It says GBOS in here, or a delegated committee, whatever GBOS wants to do. So I think got 3 out of 5. I understand the concern about short-term rentals. It is on the single-family lots. Actually, I want to talk about that a little bit, if I may. So I'm not a real estate lawyer, not a real estate developer, so I've been learning a lot, probably more than I was ever going to know about kind of how some of these mechanisms work. And I've been told by CY Investments, and had it confirmed through other land development and land financing entities, that putting a short-term rental restriction on a multifamily lot reduces the value of the lots for purposes of financing in order to get the loan to develop the land. And I am being told it will make this project not pencil. So that is why there isn't one on the multifamily lots in the S1. And then I was unaware of the construction access through High Tower Road being prohibited. I don't know much about that condition from the advisory commission, and if anyone wants to educate me, I'm open to that, but I don't know where that falls within the overall scope of all the various issues to be addressed tonight.
Anyone?
I can address it. The reason access comes off of High Tower Road, or construction comes off of High Tower Road. The reason access comes off of High Tower Road is because the utilities that have to be, take a look at that if you want. The utilities, that are being connected into the property already go up to High Tower Road. So to come off of Crow Creek Road, you'd have to build all of your construction, your roads through there. And that affects the economics of the project. It doesn't make sense to build from the top down to High Tower Road as opposed to pushing High Tower Road through, connecting the utilities, especially since we already have a $4.5 million grant for AWU to bring wastewater to the property line. And AWU is going to come off of High Tower Road. That's going to happen, whether the project happens or not, that project will take place. And so since they're already going to be there, it makes sense to start from that location.
Mr. Salt.
So ultimately, there will be secondary access through Crow Creek, through Crow Creek Road. When does that take place? Is that phase 2 or is that phase 3?
No, that would be phase 2. Planning has already identified when that's going to take place. CY Investments has to put in $150,000 into escrow to ensure that there's funding to start the secondary access on the Crow Creek Road.
Okay, so that, one of the concerns was phase 1 would go forward, phase 2 would not. There would never be Crow Creek access roads. That helps alleviate that. I put that money in escrow.
That's correct.
And then comes down to the other concern is just construction traffic, which with the development, I don't know how much traffic there will be with land, but when you start building houses, and GBOS, correct me if I'm misstating anything, and we start developing houses, start that construction process, now you're gonna have a lot more traffic coming through now. The downtown of Girdwood.
Ask a follow-up.
And just for the record, GBOS host and others are nodding their heads. So quiet communications don't really work for the record, but, so, Ms. Salt.
I do have, sorry to interrupt if I could. My name is Emma Kramer. As this conversation continues, do you all acknowledge that Crow Creek Road is not a part of the Girdwood service area? Are you aware of that? Okay. And are you also aware that it's currently not able to accommodate construction traffic without major upgrades that the DOT has not yet given? Okay. And I just didn't receive a conversation back. So to me, these conversations about access, it's important to always add that unknown financial and community oriented aspect. Thank you.
So my question was from the advisory commission, construction access. I guess I don't know what construction access means, if it means the house building construction access, or if it means the AWU project infrastructure construction access, or both. Do we know? Did they talk about it specifically? Yes, that's what I meant by the AWU project.
Okay, sure.
I think reasonably though, one would be wise to separate the two concepts. The AWU project is coming and it's coming right up that road. And it's intended to serve that road, so the construction will be on that road. The separate question with the development is the impacts of it on all of this. And so, because again, that grant happened, or it's very close to being executed, and that section is getting wastewater. And so I think, yes, we put them together in our minds as a whole slate. We have to be careful to separate them because that is happening.
Well, and the reason I ask is because we have a land development agreement, and we would have the opportunity to, in this ordinance, suggest that building construction access, look for another way. It maybe not indicate what it is, but like we could direct that needs to be explored if that's what they meant, or if that's what they want to do. I just don't have a lot of context for it. I'm hearing that the AWU project is gonna do what the AWU project's gonna do. So beyond that, I guess that's what I would like to learn more about.
Is it okay if I address this one, Mark?
Hello, this is, I'm the Girdwood Commissioner, it's Ron Tenney. Can I speak on behalf of what that was done at the meeting?
I don't know that that's the question before us, Mr. Tenney, and I have some folks queue, and so what I would prefer is to stay on track, and I'll have your name on the list.
It's fine. It's all in the minutes from the other meeting. If you guys looked at the Heritage Land Bank meeting.
Thank you.
Pretty well
So-
written. Thank you.
First, we had a question and someone was about to respond. Yep, go ahead.
I actually don't know that I can respond to this as well as Ron Tenney, but I can say this in terms of if you're specifically asking about kind of the TBOS viewpoint on this. What I'd like to say about that's consideration that was added on is that did not stem from our housing committee's request, and that did not stem from any of the thing that Girdwood. What it did stem from, though, was very valid. It's a concern around inconsistencies in the way in which the Crow Creek neighborhood plan is being used. And so to say that all the construction traffic can come down Hightower Road, which isn't on the Crow Creek neighborhood plan at all as an access to this neighborhood, and then to also say, but don't worry about it, we still don't need to do site-specific land use studies for this, or is inconsistent. So I think that was HLBAC's way of trying to confront a problem that Girdwood Board of Supervisors has asked for it to have a different way. We would like a site-specific area plan to be and site-specific studies to be done, which is really standard process unless you do this business of dredging up zombie neighborhood plans from before the single biggest economic impact on this community being short-term rentals. That plan was written before Airbnb was even funded. So I know that there's been a lot of discussion of this from lawyers saying about why that is valid, but we don't consider it valid to use it sometimes and not others, and specifically to say, don't worry about Hightower Road. We can guarantee you that those studies weren't done because it's not on the plan.
So next in the queue, I have Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make some comments to some questions and some inquiries I'm listening to. For those who don't know, one of my many hats I wear is I'm a commercial loan broker. So you had mentioned about financing versus multifamily to short-term rentals, and they are seen differently. Multifamily is considered more of a long-term investment, whereas Airbnb, short-term rental less than 30 days, is considered hospitality. They have different loan requirements. There are different financing. Typically, Airbnb is seen as more volatile. The interest rates are higher. The terms are less attractive. You can get SBA financing on them, but just they're kind of six one way, half dozen the other. But banks do prefer multifamily because you have fixed 1-year leases and they're a little more stable. Regarding the economics of this, from reviewing their projected income, I think it's all just it's such a volatile market right now for developers. I think we have to recognize the risks they're taking. Commercial lines of financing for construction have escalated tremendously over the last 6 months. We had a project that started out just 120 days ago at 8%. It's now at 10.5%. That's for a construction line of credit in order to do development. And those interest rates are not looking to go down. And so I'd be really curious about an adjustment. I think probably the income from this has gone down. Construction costs continue to go up. Interest rates continue to go up. And so part of my concern is how long this takes, because if it's not profitable, nobody will do it. And I'm really worried about how we're chiseling away at any kind of profit on this when you look at what's happening in the commercial bond market. So just some insights regarding the profit and loss and income statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Teddy. One more time, Mr. Tenney.
Yes, I was gonna say, I think Jennifer pretty well said, my concern, I think with the commission was, number one, we have a school there, it's a heavy traffic area, but the major concern also was the fact that if you're gonna use the Crow Creek neighborhood plan, if you really look at that plan closely, that plan never had an entrance coming in through Hightower. So I think, again, my issue here, regardless of interest rates, is the fact that there was never in the HLB code, you should have been mandated that there was an upgrade of this plan when you're going to do a study this size, or at least renew the Crow Creek plan. So you're basically taking a Crow Creek plan and looking at it in a sense that this makes best sense, which I would agree, coming in Hightower is the cheapest way, but it's really not in the management plan you're using. So using the 16-year-old plan, and I think a lot of the commissioners felt the same way, that the plan, if you look at that plan and then you look at the traffic going through our downtown area, this thing has not been thought out properly. That was pretty much the opinion, I believe, from the advisors.
Ms. Holtan.
Thank you for that. Did the advisory commission consider and debate whether or not to require a new area plan prior to doing its resolution for disposal? I didn't see that as a condition.
Yeah, it was done. If you go through our minutes, Brett Wilbanks and myself were pretty shocked when this plan came up without doing another plan. And what had happened was we basically got a letter that night. I think Adam has a copy of it, basically saying that your lawyers basically said the plan was good. And the reasons behind it was that it was basically, you're looking at that plan that was an enormous plan in 2006, but it was for housing. And since it was housing, the plan was good. So there, I think, it's all documented.
Let me be a bit more clear with my question, if I may. I don't see it as an approved condition by the advisory commission. So was it debated as something to be added and it failed, or was it never moved as part of the resolution?
After we were given a letter saying that we could write, basically it wasn't our jurisdiction to make that call.
Okay,
so I think
thank
we
you.
never move forward.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're just a little more than halfway through our scheduled time. Mr. Brandt, you're raise your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to check back with Mike and Emma and Jennifer to see if you were able to complete all your comments regarding the S1 of the project.
I haven't actually, if that's okay. I feel like we got a little hung up on some of those financial questions, but I think it's good. I think that those are some of the biggest questions that definitely need to be solved before anyone even considers a yes vote on this, including, as I said, really getting a good public accounting of what, where, and how what is happening with that capital projects fund, which, by the way, our HLBAC commissioners don't know anything.
Can I interrupt? You mentioned a capital projects fund of $2 million. I don't understand what fund you're talking about. We have many, many funds.
Sure.
So can you help me narrow in a little bit what you're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so we, not exactly, because I don't know the fund myself either, but we found this fund in the recent document for the muni and all the agencies audit the balance sheets for all your agencies. And under HLB fund, it says other financing sources. And it is on page 83 of this document. And on that line, it says transfer to other funds. And in 2020, there was an $80,000 transfer. The same was budgeted for 2021, but instead a $2.95 million transfer was made. On the following page, oh, sorry, Municipality of Anchorage detail statements and schedules.
So it's at the ACFR.
ACFR,
Yes.
Annual Comprehensive Financial
Okay.
Report, used to be called the CAFR.
Okay,
Okay, now we're getting to.
okay, are we getting somewhere? And then on page 84, where it said transfer to other funds on page 84, it explains that those funds went to, let me make sure I get this name right, the Heritage Land Bank Capital Projects Fund. And so our financial accountant who is looking at this and who's here, by the way, and can answer more questions about this than I can, has been on a hunt for that balance sheet for that and can't find it anywhere. And I put in a call to the finance department and haven't heard back. So we're just curious where that money is.
All right, and so I would follow, that's not a Girdwood specific line item, right? That's just a HLB wide.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
For trying.
I'm getting that ordinance right now. So, once I have it, I'll share it.
Is it okay if I follow up on, so Mr. Cross mentioned concern about the decrease in profitability. One of our other outstanding questions is why this change in the pro formas, or why this change from 4.5 million and to 1.2. And the reason why we think it's super relevant, and Mr. Cross touched on it, but I just want to tease it out a little bit, is that if we don't know the answer to that, we don't know, we can't even guess at what else might change in the profitability. And that's super critical. And there's another aspect of that that I feel like we don't know. That 1.2 million is given for phases 1 and 2. We right now have no guarantee whatsoever that phase 2 is going to happen. Even the phase 1 will happen, but let's pretend like we at least get that much done. We also need to know what the profitability is going to be from that, because it's possible that we're sitting here yakking and pulling our hair out over something that's, what, if I cut that in half, maybe that's not accurate, maybe it is, that's $600,000. I don't think we should be here for $600,000. I don't think we should be leveling our forests and building big mansions for $600,000. And I don't think we should all be wasting our time, the hours that Girdwood has put into this. So we need to know the answer to that, because that is we're way too big a risk on building roads, doing the infrastructure, setting up the basis for Connie to, or sorry, for CY Investments to then build for what? We need to know.
Quickly in there, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that's my math error. We corrected it early on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's why it's all really confusing. You should never trust me to do math. You should always check my math. And that's why I asked to check the numbers, because I knew Mr. Edgington had indicated I was wrong. And so that really should be amended, that the project profits of the 2 phases are estimated at approximately 2.25 million, not 1.2. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm sorry that I misstated that.
Okay, hold on, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did a little bit of sleuthing, as I am sometimes prone to do, and I did find that $2.6 million. So that is an AR number 2021-207 as amended. I'm going to read the title for you. It's a resolution appropriating a contribution of $2,670,000 from the Heritage Land Bank Special Revenue Fund balance as a contribution to the HLB operating fund, and appropriating said contribution to the HLB Capital Improvement Project Fund for a land exchange and associated site preparation projects, all within the real estate department. And that land exchange had to do with the Alaska Sled Dog Racing Association.
So that, yeah, that's the Tudor and Elmore Development Project. Well, we've solved one issue, but we can get that for you right.
Yeah, actually, we'd already solved that issue, but thank you. We knew where it came from. We didn't understand how it's being managed and where the balance sheet is for this.
So
it seems like we should be able to Google HLB Capital Projects Fund.
right, okay, so I'm gonna interrupt here to say a tow track project is really germane to the question of an HLB transfer to CY Investments on this project. And so separate from this conversation, we'll be happy to figure out a way to communicate to you the development that's going on with tow track. They were just on tow track on the radio, Alaska Public Media this week, talking about their successes and excitement and their fears related to a mass homeless shelter being sited right next to their work, and conflicts with fat tire bikes across their dog trails. And so that project is advancing. We'll get some information, but again, not so germane to the question. But you're right, you should be able to find it. We face that all the time.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, thank you for that. And again, I don't want to get caught down rabbit holes. I do want to just circle back quickly to Ms. Zalatel's comment about the profitability. Whatever the number is, we'd still like to know how much of that is for phase one and for phase two.
Yeah.
Is that? Okay.
I'll tell you that.
And it ties into another question about the estimated costs in section 8.4 of the development agreement, about where what are the estimated costs on this, including the offsite improvement, section line removal, track survey, rezoning. And it ties into this question of, maybe it's not relevant as far as this $2.2 million profitability, but maybe it is, again, because of, as Mr. Cross said, everything that's happening with all of our changes in construction costs. Sorry. And so finally, I want to wrap up, and I want to give other people a chance to talk. I really didn't mean to get us down so many rabbit holes. I want to talk one other set of numbers. And that is the number. As I said, I've been in real estate and I've been a long-term landlord for 20 years. One of the numbers that has really concerned me from the get-go here is the entrance cost on this. So I follow my comps really closely. What happens to my units affects everything I earn. Talking with people in the real estate business, it looks like the entry level, the best comp we've got, best and more efficient comp for what the starting entry level units for this unit that's being developed is around 800,000. Best comp for the lowest priced unit in this development is 800,000. Now I know this committee is concerned about housing and housing throughout a variety of needs within our community. The problem is it's a really tough sell to anybody that 800,000 is housing for any community in Anchorage, never mind any community in the rest of Alaska. What is most likely, based on the way our market has been going and what we've seen with who's buying houses and how they're buying them, is that those are going to turn into house-shaped objects that are dark, sitting up on the hill, possibly clearing a tree to add an ADU and put in a short-term rental. But other than that, they are not housing. They are not housing that meets the needs of our teachers, firefighters, accountants, anybody who works at the hotel, or anybody actually who's living and working. So I want that to be understood as the number that we haven't talked about that. We didn't talk about those numbers that much. And for a lot of times we kind of went with what an offhand comment the developer once made of $500,000 is not consistent with our market. What is consistent with our market is an entry-level price of $800,000 plus homeowner association fees. And up from there, at least 1.2 to 1.3 million for anything that actually is a house. And again, those have not been, that section of the market has not been turned into homes. When we have $1.2 million things sell in our neighborhoods, they are being turned into dark homes for people in other parts of the world now. And I don't know if you realize, but we just hit the New York Times today for being one of the great places to buy into. So that's not going to change once you're number 8 on the New York Times list of places to buy into for an investment. These home-shaped objects are going to work as investment vehicles and businesses if they can figure out a way around the STR regulation, but they're not going to be homes for Birdwood. And that is something that we're all going to answer to. It ends up in the end looking like a let them eat cake approach to housing development. And I don't want that on any of our backs, but that's what this actually amounts to. You're not solving any problems. And then you come into Girdwood and saying, you know, why haven't you done this, that, or the other thing? And you think, what are you doing? There's only so much we can do with high-end cake. It doesn't meet the basic need for bread. So I want to make sure that we, in the middle of talking about all these fancy details, and remember what this really is about and what it was supposed to be about is using the public lands for the public good with a process that includes the public. And I really appreciate the work in this S1, and believe me, I am so sick of this. I imagine you are as well. But we're always going to have to answer to the fact that the public process was circumnavigating. We ended up with something that not one member of the Girdwood public that's spoken to you likes or loves. That should matter.
So I would interrupt briefly and say, I have spoken with many people who are long-term residents who are afraid to speak up because they've been pilloried in the community for saying they support it. And so I would argue that, while that may be what it feels like, it's not actually how it is. There are some people in this town who believe this is a good project, and not just people on big houses with wealth, but people who actually work in town and day jobs, and, you know, they love it here.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know how it goes. As someone who has sometimes been in the short-term rental market, I understand what it's like to not want to open your mouth. So I get that. But I also have to, as a public representative, go with who we're hearing from and who's speaking up. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I was very impressed with the number of people who made it through not one blizzard, but two to speak to this assembly. And not one of them, the only person you had in favor was not a Girdwood resident. So I think in the past, Girdwood, one thing Girdwood is used to doing is disagreeing with themselves. We were able to disagree all over the whole, we don't really have a problem with that. I understand though, again, as I said, as someone who has occasionally been in the rental market, what it's like to try to speak up against the tide. But I also have to acknowledge that even that percentage, I'm going to guess, and based on, again, the only information you got, to less than 5%. And since in all my years in Girdwood, I've never seen them that united, I'm going to have to respect the majority on this, because like I said in the past, we can even fight anything. Say the word dog leash, we can fight about it.
You just said there wasn't, you have to be very careful with, my experience doesn't match that. Anyone else?
Okay.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, I wanted to go back to the financials, but first just, Jennifer, and I'm just going to go to first names at this point, because I feel like it's Friday and it's 6:30 and almost. So you were talking about HLB and the sled dog racing and money. And the reason why you brought that up is because you want to make sure that HLB is capable or qualified of handling a development. Is that correct? Is that?
Yes.
I didn't want to.
Yes, and we want clear financials.
Clear financials and accountability on that and transparency on that. Okay, understood. As far as the financials, and there are some documents that we're going to need to post online, and I apologize that some haven't gotten out to all members. Like, for example, the pro forma, and Adam, you have shared that. It's a one-page paper we're talking about. We do need to get that available because I don't think everyone has seen it yet. Have members seen it? No. Okay, so we'll be sure to get the rest of that information that has been circulating and posted so it's available. And then I guess, Adam, we've talked a little bit about some of the issues regarding the finances or questions and the desire for more information about the cash flow and payback period, quantifying risks for municipality, enough information so that folks can see and be able to follow the conclusions that have been drawn about risk and profit. And I guess I would ask, is that something that the administration can provide, or would it be helpful if, I know there are a number of financial professionals too, who may have sample documents to show what they're looking for. Maybe that would be, helpful too. That would show the entire business case with the calculations of something, that would be helpful. So I guess I just want to get at, looking at these 6 areas and then other issues that have been raised is, how to address each of those head on. And what are your thoughts as far as the kind of financial information that can be shared with everybody at this point?
If you're looking for AIM submitted into the assembly, explaining the pro forma and the market assumptions that were done, happy to provide that. With the understanding, of course, that the market's consistently changing. And obviously phase 3 isn't done yet. You know, there's still more work to be done, topography, wetlands, those kind of things. So until that's done, we really won't know it. So it'll be kind of a living, breathing document. So I don't know how often you'd like an EIM with a pro forma, but happy to provide information.
Yeah, I'll jump in briefly, just for my own satisfaction. I Googled pro forma Holtan Hills, and literally pops the pro forma and a link at the Muni. And so it is readily available right now. If anybody has a question, literally just Google pro forma Holtan Hills, and it's the first item that comes up. The analysis I can't speak to, that's a different issue.
So I'm happy to work with CMI Investments to provide, in fact, I've already reached out to her to provide that market analysis that went into the profile.
Okay, I think that would be helpful. If there's, oh, we have.
I didn't get a chance.
Okay, yeah, the right, we were speaking about the road piece.
Just had to clarify. I understand that we may not have time. I could just make it a couple minutes. I do represent the community portion.
No, I'm done, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to find a way to make sure that we provide as much financial information as we can, and that it's what folks are looking for, and that we nail that piece down. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And did you want to speak? We have
I was up.
half an hour. You got the floor. That's a stealing, not a time.
Not at all. I really don't have anything prepared, although it's been on my mind for about a year. To just explain maybe where I'm coming from as a co-chair of the Holtan Hills Housing Advisory Committee. I was a part of a very positive process. And essentially, we didn't get to speak to the S1. So to the degree that I can't speak for that entire committee, what I can say is that the committee gathered a lot of data, a lot of comments, really most of them of just heartfelt concerns. And so meeting with CY Investments and meeting with Connie and Adam, if I may use first names, I went through the experience of what we're doing right here, which I'm so grateful that I'm seeing things happen. And in that room, I was told, I'll ask legal. And it was the same questions that we're still asking today. So the process happening here is encouraging, especially since you all drove down to show us your faces and to represent us. That speaks volumes. I also want to thank you for acknowledging that it's been difficult to deal with HLB. And that's not a specific person, that's the entity that holds land for our valley. And I also want to recognize the fact that we are sitting here talking about land that essentially was stolen. And as a predominantly white group of people, we're still talking about land providing public benefit. And I would like to again ask this body, and for the sake of asking HLB, what is the intention of public lands? And how do we show the value of them for the community? Because that's essentially why there's the screaming banshees. We are not anti-development. We see great examples of development. We want that here. If we were given a pause or a redo, we would step up to the plate because it means the most to us. Unfortunately, there are less and less of us here. I've been here since 1999. Both of my kids have now graduated from South and Girdwood School. There are not many kids of their class left. Those families, some of them moved to Anchorage because that's easier and they had the ability, but many of them rented their entire school and family careers and they're gone. They had to go. And I know children that are not children, 20-year-olds that want to live here. I know college grads that want to come back and contribute to this community. And we can't offer that, so we are hollowing out this community. And I hear and I see that you hear this, and it feels important to not vote yes on this because I think we've made progress. And I know we can make more progress if we have more time. And when I hear that it doesn't pencil for the developer, we've been hearing that. And the more land in local control, the easier all of the things that you're trying so hard to make do, like deed restrictions and such, That's put into local control. It shouldn't be the problem of the developer. Because the goal is, for example, in a land trust situation of the Girdwood Community Land Trust. Before this was all created, the intention of that body was to put land in local control for the purposes of childcare, senior housing, workforce, community garden, yada, yada, yada. The entity exists, the intention exists. I don't hear it mentioned. I was in an office with discussions and mentioning it then. I don't know why it's not mentioned. Just giving a shout out to the Girdwood Community Land Trust here. I'm gonna wrap it up, but before I do, as a Crow Creeker, which is the only reason I am a landowner today, because I bought raw land for 30,000, little shy of an acre in 1999. We built our home with logs. We used recycled insulation from the school. We used tin from people's houses that our house cost $7,000. We moved in, a baby was born, 2 years later, another baby was born. Those kids are high school graduates. Success can happen in different ways. It doesn't have to be urban sprawl. We can offer some raw land. People at the top of Crow Creek are living on raw land, 75 individuals, senior citizens, teachers, kids. And just so many employees from the resort live up Crow Creek, 75 people. I, as a Crow Creeker, have survived because of that ability. I know that it's not something that seems like happens in the municipality, but we can live off grid. There's room to do that. If we're going to develop the most expensive place where the water's just coming off the road, we should have a more resilient idea of how we're building things. It doesn't need to be the old way. There's also other places to build in Girdwood, so this doesn't have to be where we're doing it right now. It is not all or nothing. I really appreciate everything this S1 has done. I really do. I see so much progress. The potential for this development will still negatively impact local residents, the taxpayers, and more important, the economic engine that this town is. The money that comes to the municipality from here has got to make a difference. I am not a financial person, but I know it. I know the alcohol sales. We don't get the alcohol tax for any alcohol programs here. In fact, we recently had someone pass away in their car, whether it was drugs and alcohol or freezing. They were an employee at Safeway, and he was trying to make it work. A month later, we had another person pass away. I don't know if he was also in his car or couch surfing. He was also struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, and he worked at the Safeway and also at the Speedway. So those businesses aren't here to speak for their employees, but it's a real thing. And 2 people in our community is an impactful situation. And we see what you're dealing with and we understand it. And we're not here to just look at our problem as more important. But please support Girdwood. Don't pass this through. Thank you.
Thanks. So I don't view work sessions as a time to make a plea for a yes or no vote. I look at it as a time to problem solve. And so I want to talk about land trusts. I love land trusts. I get excited about land trusts. I have worked really closely in the creation of the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust. And for those of you who might not know, they are holding the hotel conversions for extremely low income housing for individuals who previously experienced homelessness. So my question to you, and I think it should be a dialogue and maybe just the start of the conversation is what role do you see the either Girdwood Community Land Trust or a land trust playing in addressing the housing crisis in Girdwood? And more specifically, because I'm really nerdy about these things, how do you see, I haven't seen the governing documents of the Girdwood Community Land Trust, but I don't believe, to the best of my knowledge, that it's got restrictions as to what it can do with land right now. And so how do you see building in assurances to whatever structure to ensure that it meets your stated goals, which I think are great ones? And then how do we get it land? Because I think that's an interesting question when we're talking about HLB lands. When I did the PowerPoint, one of the things it says, we put some whereases in here to kind of stretch the idea of what's fair market value and what's required in code for the disposal of HLB lands. And so I've been wrestling with how far can you stretch the current language in code to what conveys value? You know, monetary value. It says fair market value, but I'm like, oh, let's just take value and talk about value. And so I like this idea. I just don't know where it, one, intersects in this, and then the longer play.
Thank you.
That's a really long question.
It's okay, and I apologize before for not being like focused, but in answer to this question, I think that one of the problems was that GCLT wasn't created as a part of responding to Holtan Hills. It was prior to. So to be like forced into choosing from this isn't really enticing. However, if it's like the only thing that we would get, we would figure it out. And I don't say we as, although I am, full disclosure, a board member. But what I think the answer is that referencing and collaborating with other land trusts, we've already reached out to Sitka Land Trust. And from there, we've talked with, and I can't remember which one, but the relationship is that states work best when their land trusts work together, because then they have more power. And so other states are showing that. And so we were learning that that's a trend that Alaska could benefit from. And so those conversations were happening prior to Holtan Hills. When this happened, it was like a pause. We were in defensive mode. And so I think that the answer is time and collaboration. And I also have to say, as a grant writer, Girdwood doesn't check boxes. We are not low income. We are not diverse. We have seasonal workers who are not on the census. We are never going to get the normal funding that housing gets. And so, in my opinion, declaring a housing emergency, getting support from our senators or some sort of attention to allocate funding in different ways is what Girdwood needs. And in the specific example of City of Valdez, I was successful in getting them an economic community development block grant for senior housing. I worked with the City of Valdez. They gave free land to the developer. The developer promised if he got that funding, he would build senior housing, and that's how that went. So simple. That's the kind of actionable development we think we could assemble in this town.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So is the Girdwood Community Land Trust in a position to do things like apply for community development block grant funds to?
Funny thing about that is the municipality of Anchorage cannot apply for that one.
No, we administer it actually. We're the participating jurisdiction under HUD, and the health department administers 3 key pieces of HUD funding: emergency solutions grant, which is primarily for like homeless shelters and homelessness response, community development block grants, and home funds. And home funds is for the development of affordable housing as well. And so I'm interested in learning more about the capacity of the land trust, because the assets you have to leverage, I think, then open up possibilities. So I appreciate you providing the Valdez description.
Yeah.
I want to say, I liked your statement. It's not all or nothing. I agree. It's not all or nothing with this development. This doesn't, I don't think, prevent, and actually I think it could catalyze concurrent specific development at the same time. So thank you.
So, okay, I just want to jump in quick and, first, I want to thank you. When you said we don't check the boxes, it's rare that an individual in a community or a community has that self-awareness. Because we hear all the time, all manner of justifications for community checks the boxes. But the honesty is, I can't even tell you how frustrating. Because it makes a difference. I think this assembly, minus a few people who weren't here at the time, has demonstrated great care for Girdwood in the fact that when, say, the CARES Act money came around and we appropriated $6 million, 18% of the entire municipality's CARES Act budget for a health center here, right? Which I believe is a demonstration of belief in faith, love, lack of a better word. So, I don't have a nihilistic view about what can happen, and I support this project generally. But my question really to you is about the land at Grove Creek Road. So I heard somebody say there's a lot up there for sale.
Yeah.
What are they selling for up there now, when you 20 years ago or 24 years ago bought one for 30,000? What is it?
That's a very good question. Okay, what did Matt say? 170 or 180,000 for a lot, and I can't even explain how much this lot is a precipice hanging over the edge. There is just for one small trailer set. So then there's also 4 lots for a total of 410,000. Those don't even have a municipal road to them, and they in fact are just in the slide of the avalanche. So that's where they're at. So 170 for barely half an acre, whereas in 1999 for 32,000, we purchased 3/4 of an acre.
And there's a rule of thumb in the development world that it's like, take your lot and it's triple that cost is what gets you to a house.
Yeah.
So that's a simple reality that is probably more here because of the distance from resources and all of the issues that relate to what makes this town great. So I try to struggle with that. Like, that's where buildings with smaller units, buildings with more density, those excite me. The multi-unit properties, the idea of the, they call it the
Birdhouses?
the hens or whatever they're called. Squirrel cages. This idea of doing national development really goes lots of units. Seems to me the way we achieve real success in the context of getting housing for those people who may suffer and struggle in their cars. I heard that story and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I don't see anyone here from the biggest employer in the community. Wait, maybe I did see Mike. Back here, obviously. There he is. And so I think that there has to be a partner of those folks in any conversation about doing substantial housing because of the benefit that accrues to them from having that asset.
Yeah.
Right? And it's hard for a region to make an investment in a very niche asset that provides a benefit to corporation. Right. And so I am very interested in figuring out the differential and what motivates and can motivate them to the table, to that conversation about those more high density units. And I know that a year, two years ago, we saw a DBOS resolution opposing the project because it was, yeah. Right. I'm not chastised.
Last one to some increased density, that's the only one we disagree.
Right. And so for me, like, it's almost my religion, high density, higher density, more, because housing is a crisis across the globe. It's something I'm committed to help resolve. It's challenging. So thank you for that information.
Thank you.
Can I just respond to that since you brought it up? So the last, actually this ties together several of the comments. The last 6 examples of multifamily housing density increase, the only one we didn't approve was that particular one of Powder. That was targeted specifically at, again, second homes, vacant homes. I would imagine a lot of short-term rentals as well. I think they actually sold for about 800,000 each. It was over 750 anyway, the actual marketing cost. So that's the only one we disagree with all the others, including a employee housing unit, which is currently being constructed at Alieska. And that has a density, I think there's 70, somewhere between 70 and 80 units on just under an acre. So that obviously does represent high density. And I'd also like to tie back something Meg said about, this is not, Holtan Hills obviously isn't the only solution, the only thing in front of us. And there is a huge opportunity. The community has come around and really, I think, grasped a lot of issues around housing and housing and resource. So I think we're in a position now where we can push forward with the other things we need to do and look at, the big picture plan. What, however, we don't want to happen is Holtan Hills, because of the size of the development, to push in the opposite direction to the goals we will have coming out in our area plan in a few months. So I think it's important that when we look at Holtan Hills, it doesn't push in the opposite direction and go back to very high-end, empty, single-family homes, because all of the policies we want to do in the next few years go in the other direction. So again, I think in our last work session, I emphasized 4 things we ideally would have out of any development. One, that it actually produces housing, and I still have some questions about this project. Because it's a land development only, there's no guarantee of any housing at all. And as far as I understand, there's no mechanism to guarantee any housing. We can't basic form obligations within the development agreement or within the transfers, which will go on to subsequent purchases, or at least we're very limited how to do them. So the first thing is there should be housing generated out of this. The second thing is the term community housing is effectively described by the rest of us what we want housing for people in the community rather than just single homes and obviously affordability. The mixture of housing type is something which is within this project currently defined. So again, the areas of higher density, I think, are covered. I also have some specific comments about the S1 if we're going to get to that.
We have approximately 13 minutes of time remaining. Those of us who are on the assembly have been meeting since about 9 in the morning and straight through. So, but I believe you were going to say something first, you're going to queue, and then we can go back to.
Thank you. I actually just wanted to build on what Mike said and develop a few things. The Holtan Hills, important as well. We can do this in other areas. Holtan Hills is by far the biggest, best, most developable. We feel very strongly that once this is, the way in which this gets developed permanently affects the Girdwood community. And to that point, the squirrel cages and, this land here in the South Town site that we're looking at, it looks like the best we can do because of road considerations and secondary access is 30 units. And 30 units is not a drop in the bucket compared to what we need. I work closely with the resort. They, at any given time, can have between 600 to 900 employees and currently are housing with the addition, with the new housing, less than 200 within their housing. So I would agree with Mr. Constant that there's definitely an interest in bringing them to the table, but it also speaks to the incredible need that we have, because that does not even touch the need that comes from our local restaurants, local businesses. So when you add that, we are hundreds short. And so this is why we're putting so much focus on Holtan Hills. Now, I understand we can't get it out of Holtan Hills, but if I could please address also the issue of density is not necessarily or is not automatically lead to affordability. And so I appreciate this S1, specific to this S1 and the request for more density, but it is entirely possible that we get more $800,000 condos, which in fact are the Powder Run condos that were just referred to. The reason why Girdwood disagreed with us is because they were out of touch with the neighborhood they were in, not because of the density in and of itself. In a new development, that would be a completely different consideration. That was within an existing, mostly smaller single-family homes neighborhood. So flopping that in there felt that, but that in no way should be taken as a sign that Girdwood is somehow anti-development. I'd like to just remind everyone, it's our Chamber of Commerce that first came out against this of Holtan Hills. Our Chamber of Commerce isn't any less pro-development than most other Chamber of Commerce. They came out against it because of what it does to our economy. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. And finally, if we can talk to that rule of thumb that you talked about with the base of land, the base cost of land, it goes back to one of our questions: why not sell this land outright? When Emma met, I was a little shocked to hear what you said you paid for your land, because that's about what we're getting in this deal. And so where I think, and if I could refer to Matt Schechter, if you don't mind, because he's our forensic accountant analysis on this, and he has been, is that okay if I just have him say really quickly that what he's shown as the price per acre and what our concerns are about it, is that okay or not?
Yeah, I think though the challenge of making such a comparison is you aren't going to get apples to apples, because you have to factor in the cost of all the infrastructure that goes into establishing the lots. And so when you have a place that has a road to it all the way up, those lots that are down below in access have a challenge that's different than the other lots, but they have a road. They don't have sewer. And so.
Or power.
Right.
Or fire.
Right. Exactly. And so you add all of those expenses into the cost of those acres to get to a point where you have the actual cost in the end. And so, but yes, Mr. Schechter, please. You have a couple.
So and to that point, in a buyer is actually willing to pay 10 times over for that property, but it's being like storm up value. Yeah, sorry. Not Schechter, Pittsfield resident. So based on the $2.1 million fair market value that was assessed last year, that was using Anchorage comps. Right. There were 4 properties that were assessed, or 5 properties that were assessed between $6,000 and $20,000 an acre, and there was 1 property that was around $110,000 an acre. Again, that's Anchorage, not here. So in the last year, we've had 3 properties for sale up on Crow Creek Road, and then there's that have sold and 1 that's currently up for market. So here are the numbers. and these are offer prices that I'm throwing out, and I'll give you the day's sales. So on Crow Creek Road, there was one property for 1/3 of an acre, which was sold for $69,000, so translated is about $208,000 an acre. It sold in 2 days, so I'm assuming they got pretty close to offer price. Second property was about $100,000. That property sold in 31 days, and that was for about 2/3 of an acre. So translating is about $146,000 an acre. Right. And then the last property that was sold basically within the last 13 months was a property that was for an acre. $145,000 was the offer price, sold within about 3 months. So, obviously $145,000 an acre. The current property that's out at the edge of Crow Creek Road is a 4-acre property that's being offered for $420,000. So basically they're asking for, and it's 3.191 acres. So it's about $170,000 an acre. All of these are off the grid. The properties that are going to be put here, certainly in phase 1 and phase 2, are all going to be on the grid. I would make an argument that those properties would be more valuable than the ones that people were willing to pay for off the grid, closer to town, water, sewer, utilities brought in. So why would the fair market value really be the 2.1 million that's sitting in this one? Is that a really accurate reflection of what's going on in Girdwood? You're basically giving away the land.
Right, so that assertion is.
So that's the fact. So that's the data. That's perspective. So that's the data. That's my perspective.
Another perspective where that 4-acre lot is undeveloped, no roads, one trailer, but able to be on it. So facts are funny things. I would hope we don't make presumptions based on all of that. But it's certainly a good question to figure out if the appraisals.
I mean, we're talking, big gap.
We have 5 minutes. Mr. Edgington and Ms. LaFrance, both on.
Interjected just very quickly that it was my understanding that HLB did consider selling the land outright and that there was a calculation or determination that led towards or pointed towards the joint venture as a better way to go. And I think it would be helpful, Adam, I don't know if HLB has any documentation about that or, could address that, not necessarily right at this moment. I know Mr. Edgington or Mike wants to talk about the S1, but I think that would be helpful to provide some information on that.
So Mike, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, what I'm going to do is just ask a slightly more general question about the relationship between the language in the S1, particularly the set whereases, and I think section 4, which again is talking about intent. One of the complexities of this project is a lot of the details we're looking for, we'd like to understand, are going to be established during the planned unit development phase, which comes later. And what I would like to understand is in the S1, this whereas language and the intent language in section 4, how does that relate to decisions which are made and guidance which planning has when they assess the planned unit development? So is this, although it isn't binding language, is it going to have an impact on that UP process?
Please.
So it's my intention and why there are so many whereases added is to make sure that the intention of the legislative intent of how we came to convey the parcels is really clear and instructive to the thought process of planning and zoning, go through the conditional use plan, unit development process. We often don't provide direct instruction to them because they are an independent body who then evaluate an application process. However, they do go back and read the ordinances that become a part of their packet. And I think that laying out these whereases should give them, assuming it passes with the whereases that are there, clear legislative intent on behalf of the assembly to reconcile that with section 4, which is in the ordains. That really went to that piece of what does it mean to have value for HLB? And so we're saying we are ordaining that it is the intent for this development in all phases to provide community housing opportunities attainable for year-round residents of Girdwood. I think that pushes, like we're saying, yes, we're ordaining that. We're saying it is the thing. It's not aspirational. It's not instructive. It pushes what we're viewing as value to HLB. So that's why I've divided those that way. One's very legalistic, pushing against the code, quite frankly, and the other is to be instructive for the additional phases to come.
I wonder, would it be helpful if, I know there are a couple of people on planning, I would perhaps value their opinion as well on how much they would take into account the language, the whereas language in the ordinances.
I guess I would say that the Planning and Zoning Commission is
Okay.
it is the planning department.
The planning department, when they do the stuff, are they taking into account the ordinance language?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
So
Or it was,
we really do need to be wrapping
I
up.
understand. I just wonder if we could get a 30-second answer.
Who from the commission is on the phone? Oh, staff, Mr. Whitfield.
Yeah, this is Dave Whitfield with planning.
Can you take an answer to the question as you understand it?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Edgington, to your to your question, the whereas statements in the ordinance are incredibly important, and they help guide the planning department's recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's our intent to provide the Planning and Zoning Commission with all the information necessary for them to make a decision in this particular case. So I would say the whereas statements are incredibly important to planning and Planning and Zoning Commission in deciding this case.
Thank you.
Anything else? So
Not that I can keep to 10 seconds.
I have a pretty interesting takeaway from these, like, up here, calculating based on fair market value, but I remember the Kingdom of Tibet was rated, Nepal was rated the happiest place in the world, and they came up with an alternative means of measuring value based on happiness. And for my part, I think Girdwood might be onto something, trying to figure out a way to create a different definition of what is the best value, and helping folks collectively to understand that, which might help in future development projects to frame it more closely, not just in the documents, but its context of what is valuable here. To everybody who came, really grateful, and to my peers who made the drive out. This has been a very long day. And I think maybe with just a couple of minutes, if anyone around wants to say anything before we conclude. For Peterson.
Well, I just would like to say that, you know, there is a housing crisis. There's a shortage of housing. It's not just in Anchorage, not just in Girdwood. It's all over the state, it's all over the country. And so, you know, we're not the only ones trying to find a solution to this problem. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's work in other jurisdictions, and we've done some of that. And I think we're making some progress.
Thank you. Mr. Roberto.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to echo Mr. Peterson a little bit, you know, this is, housing is a conversation that this assembly has had a lot of and will continue to have a lot of. And I want to thank everyone for coming out, both engaging in this as well as the previous public hearing that we had. You know, I think we have heard a tremendous amount on this topic, and I think we have a lot of work to do before we get to a vote. And so, thank you.
Mr. Salt.
So I would encourage you to continue to work on the squirrel cage of the alternative idea. Because the way I kind of see this potential for this board is two pieces at the same time. While Holtan Hills is one piece that we necessarily don't agree with because we want more workforce housing in it. But there may be a second piece that together meets the needs of Girdwood. It's all about compromise. And I said it back in the fall, my concern is this goes nowhere, it goes away, and it'll be 10 years before we get back in front of the assembly or the Heritage Land Bank. You get workforce housing, you have a lot of power, a lot of attention right now. Let's not let a good crisis go to waste.
So Thank you. Thank you for all the comments, the interaction and feedback. I feel a little bit like an interloper, not being your representative, coming in, trying to see if there is a way forward. I get the urgency, but I think there's like an old adage, like how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Hundreds of housing units start with 8 or 10 or 30 or how many ever it may be. So I think that's really an important perspective to keep in mind. And I've learned a lot here tonight. I have a lot of notes on this S1. So I think, again, this is iterative. And just really briefly, we kind of glossed over it, but I want to thank Senator Murkowski for bringing home the AWU infrastructure grant. We said originally in the S1, it says, hoping it is official now. And so I think that helps make things it brings costs down, and it does provide some of the infrastructure that I've heard that this community is saying is needed. I know there's a lot more. So thank you for your time tonight. Thanks for coming in.
Wait.
So as the newest member of the I am by doing, but my philosophy is I'm a pragmatist. I would rather get something than nothing. And I love that phrasing of hundreds of units start with only a few. I appreciate that. What I'm seeing is that we are working together, that we are listening to feedback and using this working session to try to solve problems, to try to overcome whatever impasses we may currently have. So I am optimistic that the outcome is going to be something that we can be proud of.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Khan.
This is gonna be a lot of food for thought, as have your many emails and all of your testimony. And I think my colleagues and I really do appreciate it. Even though at times it has felt inundated, I definitely hear loud and clear the need for community housing. And I want to work on making that happen in the future for Goodwood. And helping you, assisting you, as we did with our appropriations on your area plan. And really getting that ball rolling. You know, I will say that there has been a push-pull in the conversation I've noticed regarding density. And my hope is that Goodwood will embrace density, because although they are not the same, they are linked. And it is that point that hundreds, thousands of units start with 10, 20, 30. And I do want to respectfully push back on the power line, because, you know, that was a development that was originally concepted to be 12 rooms. There was a compromise, took it down to 9, and still there was a letter of objection from GBOS to say, no, that's too much. We want it to be only 6. Not only that, we want a maximum structure height of 2 stories and sufficient vegetative screening. We don't even want to see it. The development should exceed the minimum parking required by Anchorage code. Well, I think you know how I feel about parking minimums. To minimize light pollution. So here we are back to shadowing and solar access.
Which we had a work session on today.
There should be no area lighting of driveways. And so I just think it's hard when you're putting, and I understand that maybe these were expensive condos, and again, do not meet that need for community housing. You know, there's some language in here about neighborhood character, and when I hear that, I have mixed feelings about that term. It kind of feels loaded. We just have to consider all of these parameters that we're putting around developers, because I think things do need to pencil, and you end up risking that. You know, you're getting nothing instead of something. And so I hope that again we can just embrace density, embrace mixed use. How cool would it be if we could see Girdwood having cooler mixed use than even we do in our suburban sprawl, you know, in Anchorage whole area. So anyway, that is just my encouragement to Girdwood. But again, I appreciate everything we're going here. I have, you know, we never kind of got this around to us because I wanted to hear people speak. I'm curious about exempting the accessory dwelling units in the single family properties. And I think probably I want to talk more offline about that.
You can't, but you can send the question through the clerk's office and then I can provide a response and
Got it.
back up to all members.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. There's a few.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for being here and especially to Meg for working through this S1 version and keeping this conversation going, and Adam also for being here as well. It's hard to me to like hear all these questions, and you had a list of 6 and you had different things, Jennifer and Emma. I really want to go through every single one of them and work through responses, and I hope we can get there and provide the information that will satisfy that. And I don't know if this project will, but at least hopefully we can get that information to remove any opaqueness in a number of areas. I owe some of you some emails and calls, and I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I'm not dodging you. It's just, you know, there are a lot of you, right? Well, it feels like a lot, and you know, I just very much appreciate the engagement, and like others have said, have learned from the points you raised, and appreciate how much you care about your community. There are some other documents that I will get out and get to you, Claire, like the appraisal report as well. I'm not sure if that's been widely distributed. And then, Meg, we didn't mention anything about the discussion about possibly handling a land conveyance through a resolution. And I know we're out of time, but that's something that had started off as being a part of the X version. But because it's an HLB action, it's something we talked with Adam about, would be in a separate resolution. So we haven't forgotten about that piece. But anyway, thank you all so very much, and I appreciate the conversation and feel like big progress is being made. I really like this format.
One housekeeping item, Suzanne, on the phone, I'm sorry, anyone on the phone? Austin or Kevin? Austin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks to everyone. Sorry I'm not there. It's nice to be able to listen from here and appreciate the vibe of this meeting. It feels collaborative and that people are trying to come up with solutions and listen to each other. And I think that's great, and just appreciate you all doing that. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Mr. Cross, are you still there? I think we've lost him. Cameron? Lost him too. So just a matter of housekeeping, Suzanne and I are in the leadership and looking at our meeting on Tuesday. It's packed. And this item deserves thoughtful time. And so we intend to ask the body to postpone it to Thursday. We already have a special meeting set from 4 to 5. So it'd be from 5 to 6, or 5 to 7, whatever it would take for us to have this conversation. Well, yeah. That's the 19th. And so, like I said, the intent is to not make this be part of a meeting where we feel like there's 150 other things we have to do tonight. And so we can't say that for sure because it's not a decision, it's a decision of the body, because the item is published on the agenda. But that's the plan at this time. And, you know, thank you, everybody. I was very mad to come out here. But because it's a work meeting and I'm not on my skis. And so, Anchorage is still cleaning up from the snow you deposited when you brought your 4 weeks ago. So thank you all for attending. We'll get there soon. We're adjourned. Tommy's gavel.
Thank you.